It had only been a few weeks since James and I had called it quits. The house once filled with the noise of shared conversations. Laughter and quiet companionship now felt hollow and unsettling. I hadn't been prepared for the silence that settled in, the space between us after our breakup. The weight of our past lingered, especially with Alex still living here. He hadn't left yet. I wasn't sure why. Part of me suspected it had something to do with the tension he and his father had shared. In the months before we split, James had always been distant, and the cracks in their relationship were evident. But Alex never said much about it. Maybe he was staying because he needed time to figure out what was next. Or maybe despite everything, he still felt connected to me in some way. Alex was always playful, a bit of a tease. Even when I was with his father, his light-hearted jokes often had an undercurrent. I couldn't quite place it, was never overt. But there was always something more, when his eyes lingered a second too long, or when his comments touched a little, too close to the edge of what felt appropriate. Back then I passed it off as youthful banter, something harmless until lately. I noticed how it made my stomach flutter in ways I couldn't ignore. He still teased me even now, but it felt different. It wasn't the playful teasing of someone who just wanted attention. It was deeper, almost like he was testing boundaries, sensing something in me that was both unspoken and unwilling to confront. I'd laugh it off, of course, but a part of me wondered if he, too, felt the pull between us. The bathroom door creaked open that night, and before I could turn to see who it was, I already knew. Alex had a way of slipping into rooms without any warning, especially when he was looking for something, usually an excuse to talk, joke, or make a quick comment. But tonight felt different. My heart was racing in a way I couldn't explain, and my body responded to his presence in a way I was too afraid to acknowledge. I had thought in my naivety that time would heal the awkwardness of our breakup. But seeing Alex like this, so close and so undeniably present, it was clear there was no easy way to move past the shift in our relationship. He didn't speak, and neither did I. There was a silence that settled between us. Thick and palpable it was, as though time had stopped. In the moments that passed, neither of us quite knowing how to navigate the sudden change. When he stepped closer, I felt it. The tension in the air. I didn't know if it was his nearness or the feeling that something unspoken had finally found a voice between us. But I couldn't turn away. His hand brushed my arm. It was hesitant, like a question, an inquiry into how I might react. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my skin tingle from the contact, the warmth of his touch igniting something that had always been there, waiting beneath the surface. Slowly, I turned to face him, unable to stop myself. His gaze met mine, and in that quiet moment, everything shifted. There was no immediate understanding. It wasn't like either of us had planned this. It was simply the rawness of the moment, the undeniable tension that hung in the space between us. His hand found my cheek gently. Almost reverently, my heart thudded painfully in my chest, as if my body was reminding me how wrong this felt, how misplaced this was. And yet it didn't stop me from leaning into him. When our lips met, it was slow, tentative. I felt the hesitation on both sides, but neither of us pulled away. His touch lingered, hesitant but searching. The kiss deepened, and with each passing second, something in me let go. Something I haven't known was so tightly wound. I couldn't remember why I had resisted this feeling for so long. All I knew was that it was undeniable. Now I could feel the weight of what we were doing. The gravity of the moment pulling me under. Guilt gnawed at me, but there was another feeling. Something raw, something urgent that I had no control over. It felt as though I were falling into something I couldn't get, out of something that both exhilarated and terrified me. His touch was gentle, exploratory, as though he was learning my skin all over again. Each brush of his fingers against my body sent a wave of heat through me. It wasn't reckless, but it was deliberate. He seemed to savor every second, every small movement, as though this moment might slip away from us if we weren't careful. I tried to push away the gnawing sense of guilt that lingered in the back of my mind. I had no idea how to explain this to myself, let alone anyone else. But with each kiss, with each gentle touch, I found myself losing my grip on the reality of what we had become. The connection between us wasn't just physical. It was emotional, undeniable, and powerful. I had no words for it. Afterward, I lay there beside him, the silence between us almost oppressive. The warmth of his body next to mine was a stark contrast to the chill in my chest. I could feel the weight of what had just happened. The quiet admission that this was more than a mistake. It was something real, something that neither of us could ignore. But still the guilt remained. It was there lurking, reminding me of what I had just crossed. I had always told myself that I would never let things go this far, never let myself fall into something that would destroy me. Yet here I was, tangled in something I wasn't sure how to navigate. The days after the bathroom moment were filled with a strange stillness. I couldn't avoid him no matter how hard I tried. He was everywhere, his presence in the house as constant as the air I breathed. And every time we shared the same space, a spark seemed to flare between us, unspoken, undeniable. I could feel it in the way my heart quickened when our eyes met. In the way my body seemed to tense when he brushed past me. It wasn't something I could push away. It was inescapable. I wasn't sure how to navigate it. The guilt still clung to me like a shadow, but it was laced with something else, something too intense to ignore. The moments when I was near him felt heavy, charged as though the air between us was electric, with a kind of hunger neither of us could satisfy, by simply pretending everything was normal. I knew this was wrong. I knew it was a line I shouldn't cross. And yet every glance, every unintentional brush of his fingers against mine, made it harder to resist. It was one evening in the kitchen, the warmth of the fading sunlight spilling through the window, casting a golden glow over everything. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house were the only sounds. But that silence between us, so thick, so heavy, was deafening. I was standing by the counter, mindlessly moving through a task, my hands trembling as I wiped down the surface. And then without warning, I felt him. He didn't speak, but I felt his presence like a pool in the air. It was as though the space between us had narrowed, without either of us taking a step. I didn't look at him right away. I couldn't, but I felt the heat of his gaze on me. The way it seemed to trace the curve of my back, the slow, almost deliberate way he took in my form. The tension was unbearable, like an invisible thread connecting us, taut and trembling, waiting for something to give. Slowly, almost reluctantly, I turned. His eyes met mine, and I could see it there. The desire. It wasn't just in the way he looked at me. It was in the way the room seemed to shift, the air thickening between us. There was something unspoken there, a silent understanding that neither of us could deny. This wasn't about what had happened before. It was about something more, something raw and powerful that had taken root between us. I didn't move, neither did he. But the space between us had become a pressure I could no longer withstand. I could feel my breath quickening, my chest tightening. I couldn't look away from him. Couldn't pull myself from the intensity of the moment. And then with a slow, deliberate movement, he stepped closer. His hand brushed against mine, the contact light at first hesitant. But there was nothing uncertain about the way my body responded. Every fiber of me seemed to ignite at the touch. It was like a spark in dry grass, a rush of heat that spread through me in an instant. I couldn't stop myself as I leaned into the touch, as I felt myself drawn to him with a force that seemed too powerful to fight. And when his lips met mine, It wasn't like before. It wasn't soft and uncertain. It was urgent, a kiss that spoke of everything we had been avoiding. His hands found my skin, pulling me closer with a quiet intensity that left me breathless. I let go of everything, the guilt, the hesitation, and surrendered to the pool between us. It wasn't just physical. There was something deeper in the way he held me, the way his body pressed against mine. It was as though we were no longer separate, no longer bound by the roles we had once played in each other's lives. I wasn't just his father's ex anymore. He wasn't just the young man who had teased me in passing. In that moment, we were something else. We were two people who had been drawn together by something that neither of us could name or understand, but something that felt like fate. As we moved together, there was a desperation in our closeness, a need to bridge the gap between what had been and what we were becoming. My mind was a whirlwind torn between guilt and longing, between fear and desire. But when his hands caressed my back, when his lips trailed down my neck, I stopped fighting it. There was no room for hesitation now. It was as if every part of me had been waiting for this, had been drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. We didn't speak afterward. The silence was thick again, but this time it was different. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't filled with shame or regret. It was filled with something else. Something that couldn't be named yet. Something that lingered in the air between us, in the space where words had once been. I woke up the next morning, the sunlight streaming through the blinds, casting soft stripes across the bed. My body felt different, sore. But not in a painful way, more like I had woken up from a dream. A dream that still clung to me, refusing to let go. The events of the night before were still vivid in my mind, every moment playing like a film reel in my head. I couldn't quite make sense of it. The house was quiet, just like it always was. Now I knew Alex was somewhere. Maybe still asleep, or maybe avoiding me, just as I was trying to avoid him. I didn't know how to act around him anymore. It wasn't just that. The physical part of it felt like a boundary we had crossed. It was everything else. The way we now moved in the same space. The way we could no longer pretend things were the same. But despite the storm of emotions inside me, there was something else. Something I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I wanted to push it away. There was a pull between us, something magnetic and undeniable, and I could no longer pretend that it was nothing. The next time we saw each other, the silence between us wasn't as thick. It was still there, but it had changed. There was a quiet understanding between us, and knowing that things had shifted, and while part of me still feared what this meant, what it would turn into, another part of me felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just a moment. It was the beginning of something real, something neither of us could deny.